Before Kenya was a colony, it was a land of peoples, Kikuyu, Luo, Kalenjin, Maasai, Luhya, and many others, each with their own traditions, land systems, and ways of life. Land was not just property, it was identity, it was memory, it was survival. When Britain arrived at the end of the 19th century, it did not come looking for partnership. It came looking for land. Through treaties signed under pressure and laws written in distant offices, vast areas of fertile Kenyan land were seized and handed to European settlers. These areas became known as the White Highlands. Indigenous communities were pushed onto reserves, forced into labor, and taxed for living on their own soil. Kenya became a settler colony, not just ruled but occupied. Africans were excluded from political power. Movement was restricted. Resistance was punished. Yet resentment grew quietly, deeply, and patiently. By the 1940s, the pressure had reached a breaking point. Educated Africans demanded reform. Veterans returned from World War II, having fought for freedom abroad, only to find none at home. Land hunger intensified, promises were broken. Then, in the early 1950s, resistance erupted. The Mau Mau uprising began. It was not a traditional war. It was a revolt born of dispossession. Fighters, many from the Kikuyu community, took oaths and retreated into forests and mountains. They targeted symbols of colonial power, settlers, loyalist chiefs, infrastructure. Britain responded with overwhelming force. A state of emergency was declared in 1952. Tens of thousands were detained without trial. Villages were cleared. Detention camps spread across the country. Torture, forced labor, and collective punishment became routine. Britain described Mau Mau fighters as terrorists. Kenyan families remembered them as freedom fighters. One man was arrested during this period, not for violence but for political organizing. His name was Jomo Kenyatta. He was imprisoned for years, even as the movement for independence grew stronger. By the late 1950s, Britain realized that Kenya could not be held forever. International pressure increased. The cost of repression mounted. Negotiations began. Gradually, Africans were allowed greater political participation. Leaders were released. Political parties formed. On December 12, 1963, Kenya became independent. The British flag was lowered. The Kenyan flag was raised. Jomo Kenyatta became Prime Minister, later President. Celebrations filled the streets, but Kenya's freedom carried silence with it. The story of the detention camps was buried. The suffering of thousands was minimized. Land injustices remained unresolved. Freedom had arrived, but not all wounds were healed. Kenya's story reminds us that independence is not always clean. Sometimes it comes through forests, prisons, and unspoken pain. But it also reminds us of something else, that land remembers. And people do too. When land is stolen, resistance grows roots. Freedom delayed, denied, and punished will eventually demand its voice.